Welcome! Today we're gonna discuss everything that you need to know as a beginner about variables in Apex. And does it mean that we're gonna discuss every single topic there it is about variables? No, because I'm gonna be focusing only on two things. First, you can apply it in real world, and second, it is not too advanced so that you as a beginner can understand. The idea is that when you open this video as a complete beginner, you have never coded a single line of code in your life. Then by the end of the video, you will be able to code a little bit of variables, because variables is the first and most important topic. So let's go and get started. So first thing, where do you even write code in Apex? When you open Salesforce, you can create any Trailhead org or any org that you have already. I recommend starting with a new fresh org, but any org that you have will be fine. So you're gonna start probably somewhere here, and the first thing that you go is click here and go to the developer console, and I usually open it in the new tab, because if you click on it like this, it's gonna open in the complete new window, and that's a little bit annoying, so I don't really like it. Close window. All right. So when you open developer console, you're probably gonna see something like this. And let me make it a little bit bigger. Where we're gonna write code is gonna be here in the debug and open Animus window. So you will have it empty because I already had code before, so it saved the code before. And this Animus window, this is basically a way for us to execute Apex scripts. So it's not exactly how you would do it in the real life. In real life, you would use classes, methods, and you would save it in the org. But here we're just going to be practicing variables so that you get familiar with Apex, so that you already write first lines of code. So this is a very nice way of doing that. And why I don't recommend usually people starting with VS Code? Because VS Code, it needs a lot of setup, a lot of different things. So don't do this. Don't do VS Code. Focus on learning how to code and then only go into stuff like VS Code. So the first thing that you need to know here is actually not about variables, but how can you execute Apex here? And that's why we need to discuss system.debug. Wow, that's like a lot of stuff that is going on here. But first, let's write it. Hello world. And then we're gonna discuss. So you don't need to understand what's going on right now on the line number 1. The only thing that you need to know is that Apex is gonna execute every line one by one, okay? Starting with the first line and the only line that we have so far. So let me execute this. Execute. You can see that the only thing that happened here is that now in the logs, if you're in another tab, you can just switch to the logs. You can see that there was a log created with some operation, what happened, time, and if it was successful or not. We can click twice on it. Here we go. It took me a little bit. And we can see all the logs. So what is a log? Log is basically a way for the Salesforce engine to tell what's going on during the Apex execution. It's basically just saying, okay, here's the code. So I got a command to execute Animus Apex. So I'm gonna be allocating heap, I'm gonna be doing blah blah blah, and a lot of different system things. It tells us a lot of different unnecessary, very not useful things. And then it also says for us, hello world, so the variable that we created there. And the most important that you need to know here is that you have events, so basically the way for the system to tell what is going on there, and that you have details, and this is what we're usually looking for. So here in the details, you can also see a little bit more details with a timestamp, with what happened, and then here the actual information that the system, the Apex engine wanna tell us. And here you can see the line number, okay? So another thing that you can see in those logs are limits, but we don't really care about this. And an interesting fact that you can already notice is that the timestamp here, and you can see that everything happens here within 1 millisecond. Quite impressive, because if it was just a simple flow, it would probably take at least a couple of milliseconds. And the difference between 1 millisecond and, let's say, 3 milliseconds, even though both are quick, but it's 3 times the difference. So it shows how efficient is Apex and how efficient is Salesforce at running Apex code. Okay, so now what about the system.debug? System.debug, it's a command for Apex to print something out to the logs, because it prints out a lot of different junk here, and it's kind of hard for us to see what's going on here. It prints a lot of this garbage, and what we want to have is that we want to say, okay, but I want that you print certain things to the logs so that I can see them. And that's where we have the system.debug. Now, you don't really need to understand how exactly the system.debug works, and in fact, you can't as a beginner, because that involves understanding classes and methods and parameters, right? So for now, you need to treat this thing here as basically just saying that, okay, whatever I put inside of this system.debug, that's gonna be put into the logs. Okay, and what you can do is check here the checkbox, so that when you execute, the log is automatically open, and then you can also click here on the checkbox and say debug only, and it's gonna show only everything that was ever put here in the system.debug. And like this, we can execute multiple different lines, and I can click on the execute, and you're gonna see that here's line 1, 2, and 3, and we have hello world 3 times. Okay, so what the hell is the variable in general? The problem with learning Apex is often what you already have seen, because I wanted you to explain the variables, but I had to explain you different things before. And the same thing happens to variables. You really can understand variables only when you understand classes and objects. So you kind of have to work sometimes with the stuff that is unknown, which is kind of the whole essence of programming and learning how to code, and the whole difficulty about it. So we're gonna discuss everything that you need to understand about variables right now, but they're gonna be still stuff that you're gonna have to understand later, once we're gonna discuss objects and classes. And the most important thing here is that no matter how much I'm gonna show you stuff, you still have to go and do it yourself. So the best way to follow what I'm showing you is actually trying to retype the stuff that I'm showing you, and trying to play around and think and break things and modify things. Okay, so just basically we can summarize it: be curious and check everything that I do and see how you can break it. All right, so let's write the first variable. And any variable we write in Apex, that's always going to have the same structure. And this structure is following: variable type, variable name, then we assign this equal sign, then the value, and then the semicolon. The semicolon in Apex, it just separates different commands between each other. So the semicolon, it goes all the time, no matter what you write in Apex at the end of the line. And this is how you create first variable. But first, I want to explain you a little bit more conceptually what is a variable in general. The idea behind the variable, it doesn't really exist in the real world in the way you would imagine, but we can make an analogy with the real world. Let's say you're moving on to a new apartment, and you have a box, and you have a lot of books. I don't have a lot of books, but I have some books. So I want to move them, and I want to move them all together. And let's say I have a whole library of books, and I want to separate them a little bit. I want to put some science books, I want to put aside, and I want to put programming books into another part, and whatever poetry that I don't have, I want to put in another box. We can think about the variable as about a box. So variable is kind of a box, and on this box you can write something. You can write, okay, those are books, and then you can put the books inside. So the same goes for the variable. The type of the box, that would be the variable type. The variable name, that would be what you put on the box, and the variable value, this is what you put inside of the box. Okay, so here's the same example, right? String, that would be a variable type. About this a little bit later. Then book, that would be the variable name, and then there would be a value. So let's speak about those parts one by one. Variable name. There are a couple of requirements that you need to use for the variable name. It cannot start with a number. It cannot be any reserved words. So for example, you cannot say string. Yeah, right? So you cannot name your variable string because it's already reserved for a type. And there's I think 255 character limit for the variable name, which is quite long. So you will never run into the issue that that you don't have enough characters to name your variable. There are also a couple of different things that you cannot do there. So let's go first before we continue here with this theory blah blah blah. I'm gonna show you how to actually create it here. So I'm gonna go here and write string books, and I'm gonna write here Harry Potter. All right. So the book, the name of the variable, it, as I already said, it cannot start with a number. You can see even the highlighting here, it's changing based if I do it wrong. So if I click on the execute, it says unexpected token, because it does not expect after the string and then the white space, it expects to have a character, not a number. So that doesn't work. Another thing that cannot be is that we cannot use special characters. It's gonna also say, okay, some strange stuff here. There's one special character that you can use. You can use the underscore, but you cannot use underscore at the end and at the beginning, right? So you can use it only in the middle, something like this. And with numbers, you cannot start with a number, but you can finish with a number. Those are very strange rules, like they don't make a lot of sense, but basically think about this. You need to name your variables, usually using just characters. You don't want to have numbers in your variable names, and you also don't really want to have some special characters like this at the end. It is a little bit strange, so don't do that. Usually from the best practice standpoint, you want to have just your normal naming, like books, for example, or like sci-fi books, right? Something like this. So that's about naming the variables. Another thing that you cannot do is that you cannot make way too long of a variable name. Again, there's a limit to it, but it's usually not that you're gonna run into this problem, because why would you name your variable with the 200 characters? That's way too long. So having this code, let me execute this and show you how it looks like inside of the logs. Right? So you can see that here, let me expand the event. Variable scope begin. This event, it just basically means we created a new variable, okay, books, and the type is string. This false, ignore it. This is just Apex outputs some stuff for on purpose, so we don't really care about this. Right, so you can see here, and then variable assignment Harry Potter, right? So basically those logs, you can see all the information, everything that is happening in your code. And you can see here that there are actually two things happening. This first, the variable is created, and then variable assignment happens. So those are two separate things. And this is interesting, because now we need to discuss the declaration and initialization. Whenever you create a variable in Apex, there are actually those two stages in any variable that you create. Okay, any variable that you're gonna have, it's gonna go through these two stages, no matter what is this variable. It's declaration and initialization. Let's go back to our analogy with boxes. When you declare a variable, basically what you do is that you create the box and you write the name on it. And when you initialize the variable, you put the value inside. So let me give you an example. This here, this is declaration. So you declare a variable, right? You put the type of the variable, and then you put the name of the variable. So basically you create a box. And then equal here, and this is where you put already the value of the variable. And this is how it looks like visualized. And the interesting thing that it can also happen in two different lines. So you can have here string books, and then books would be equal to Harry Potter. Because again, those two processes, they're kind of separated. They're about the same variable, but there are two different processes. You can declare a variable without initializing it. So you can have a box that's not going to have any books inside, which makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to click on execute so that you can see how it looks like inside. Not debug only. So you can see that here the variable is created. First it's empty, and then it has Harry Potter inside. Now, we talked about variables in general as a concept. But there's a lot of things here that we did not discuss. And let me bring back. So what we didn't discuss here is what the hell is string and why do we have here those single quotes? Why don't we have here, for example, double quotes? Which see, it changes the highlighting quite a bit. So this thing here, it's a variable type. And you can even take this as a template. Any variable that you're going to create in Apex, always going to have this template. So it's going to be type, then it's going to be name, it's going to be equal, and then there's going to be a value. And in this case, the type is a string. String, that means string, it means text. In Salesforce in general, we have different types for a text, right? We have a pick list, we have email, we have text area, we have rich text area, whatever. So there are many different ways essentially in Salesforce to say that this is text. And in Apex, they're all represented with just a string. And whenever you have a string, you also have to put those single quotes. So the single quotes, that means that you have a text there. There might be a question, what happens if I don't put here anything? Right? And it's possible. You can create a variable and then just not put anything inside. You can think about the variable a little bit like about a field on a record. You can have a field that is empty, right? So let's execute this and see what we've got there. Okay. And we can see that the books will be null. So null is basically just a way for Apex to say null. It just means there's no value, right? That we chose this word null, it doesn't have to be this word null. We can just agree to whatever we want, what kind of phrase. We could agree to like something like no value or undefined, right? Something like this, we could agree for this, but in Apex, because it's derived from Java, it's going to be null, right? The best practice is always whenever you have a variable in the same line, you want to declare it. You want to declare it and initialize it. So in the same line. So here you want to have like Harry Potter in the same line. Okay. Now let's speak a little bit more about different data types in Apex. There are many data types. They're divided into different groups, but I'm going to explain you first those that you need to know about. So the data types that we're going to speak about, the first type we already get to know, it's string. Another data type is integer. And it's very simple because integer is just basically, it means an integer number. It's a number without any decimal points. So for example, integer age would be 25. And another thing that we can have, integer, whatever, coffee is 2 coffee cups, for example, 2, something like this, right? Very simple, nothing to do here with this one. Then we have a decimal, and the decimal is a little bit more interesting because decimal, it's the same as integer, but it has decimal points. Now, when I speak about this, you can immediately think about this different field types, right, that you can have. So when you create a new field in Salesforce, you can set different amount of decimal points at the end that you have. And if you set 0, that's going to be an integer. If you set some decimal points, it's going to be obviously a decimal, right? So let's put a decimal here, and I'm going to say age decimal is going to be 25.5, and the same decimal consumed, whatever consumed, it's going to be 2.5, don't have coffee. Okay. Now, this is not all the number types. Those are the two most important types. But there is a thing about them that they only can contain certain values. So, for example, for the integer, the maximum number we can put into an integer is this number. why this number? It has to do, I don't want to go too deep into how we came to this number. I can just link you to the video. It has a little bit more with the computer science and how the binary system works and all of this. So you don't really need to know about this. But what you need to know that this is the maximum number. So let's write here max. And then I'm going to write here a minimum number. And the minimum number will be the negative and 8 here. That's the minimum number. So those are the only numbers that you can put. What happens if for some reason you need to have a greater number than that? Then you can use another data type, which is called long. And here the long, so the long data type in Apex, it is this number. And then you have to put L inside. This is the maximum long number that you can have. And obviously the same goes for the minus, right? Why it is not so important, and I don't like to focus on this long number, is because the cases where I had it in 5 years of Salesforce development, where I had to use long number, was so limited that I can't even think about something very useful where you would use them. Obviously, it is useful if you need to store huge numbers, right? But those are numbers that there's not even that much revenue of companies that they have. So what would you store there in those numbers? Well, obviously, sometimes you have to, but in general, this is way too much. And usually you can get along with just using integers, okay? So everything that we're going to be discussing about integers going to be applicable for long type, right? So the way they behave is basically the same thing. It's just the only that integers, because they're smaller, they take up less space during the execution. So whenever you can use an integer, you should be using integer and not long. So in almost all the cases, just use an integer and that's going to be already good. Now, the same goes for a decimal, right? So let's go back to the decimal. We have decimal A, it's going to be 25.5, right? There's the same type, which is called double B. It's going to be 25.5555, whatever. So double is the same idea as the decimal, but it's double the precision. It's double how many points you can have, what is the biggest number that you can have before the decimal point and after the decimal point. So the idea is for certain orgs, for certain code that needs to be really, really precise, you should allow to have a very good precision so that at the end we can add them, multiply them, and not have any rounding issues. But the chances are in your first year, maybe 2 as a Salesforce developer, you're probably never gonna have to use them. Okay? So what I suggest for people who are just going into this whole thing is that you focus on integer, decimal, and string. Those are the most important types that you need. You don't need, there are other types, but you need to focus on those to make them work, okay? That's the most important part. Now, another important thing that we need to discuss is a strange behavior between decimals and integers. Now, let's say you are here in Salesforce and let's go to, for example, accounts, right? So this is my org that I'm using just for the testing purpose. So we have here accounts and we can go to the details and let's find something like, where is it? Here we go. Pick list, I think pick list is good. So we have a pick list, right? In the pick list, you can only put certain values. You cannot just type there whatever you want. And the same goes if we had some kind of here, like a checkbox, right? In a checkbox, you cannot really put a text or a number. And the same goes for our data types. So for example, if you have here, integer A will be equal to 5. Good. But can you do something like this, Alex? Let's try. I'm going to click on the execute and it says illegal assignment from string to integer. So here we have string and here we're trying to assign the string to an integer. which wouldn't work. And it doesn't work in Salesforce either. You cannot assign to checkbox a number or a text. It just does not work. And the same applies for Apex, of course. So how we can summarize this thing here with assigning the right things? There's a rule that I'm gonna say to you, and you have to just keep this in mind, that type on declaration equal to the type on initialization. And I have here a visualization of that, right? So you need to pay attention that whenever you initialize a string variable, you cannot put any number there, and other way around. And here's how it looks like. If you put here 5, that won't work again, right? Because remember those single quotes here, it means that this is a string. So you can only have here a string, and then it would work. The same goes if you have a string and you try to put here 5 like this, it will not work, right? Okay, it doesn't work. And then if you have here an integer and you try to put 5.5, it will not work as well. There's an interesting thing that I need to explain about working with integers and decimals. So first of all, think about that every integer that you have, or you can potentially have, you can also write with a decimal, right? So for example, we can have integer 5, let's do like this, 1, and then we can have 2, 3, 4, and so on, 100, right? And so on. We can write the same with decimals, right? Decimal would be equal to 1.0, and so on, 2.0, 3.0, like this. So this is the visualization behind it, right? So you have integers, and integers are kind of part of a decimal. But practically what it means, let's do it like this. So we have here integer a, and if I try to do like this, let's see if I can do that. No, I can't, right? It makes sense, because we have here an integer, and here we have a decimal. Makes sense. But now, let's try to do this, which is strange because here we have a decimal and here we have an integer. And let's comment this thing out, execute, and that's possible. And there's reason behind it, because to any decimal, you can assign an integer, because remember, integers, they're a subset of decimals. So you can assign to every decimal, you can assign an integer, but not other way around. Because what if you pick some number here that is not included into integers? What if you pick, for example, here 1.5, right? Then you cannot already assign it. Execute. You cannot do that. That's the weird thing about decimals and integers, and that's pretty much all you need to know about them. But now we still have one data type that we did not discuss, and it's a Boolean. And it's a very simple data type. It only has 2 values, right? With integers, we had basically an infinite amount of values that we can have, right? So we had integer a, and then we can put 1, we can put 3, 77, 777, whatever. We can put whatever we want there. Boolean, we can only put either true or we can put false, because Boolean is basically just a checkbox, right? So if we go here to this checkbox, you can't really put anything there except the checkbox is either checked or unchecked. So the only things that we can do is that we can have here Boolean a is equal to false, or it's equal to true, which is something like the checkbox is checked. So did we discuss all the data types? Not really. So there is still a couple of different data types that we did not discuss, but I don't want to discuss and go into them because it's just going to confuse more. For example, date, that's going to be the same date in Apex, right? So there are types in Salesforce itself, but then there are also types in Apex, and they don't necessarily match one-to-one. Date is, for example, the same, right? But with the checkbox, it's called Boolean. With a date time, it's still date time, but with a decimal, that would be in Salesforce, everything would be just a number. Another important thing is that we have here a string, in Apex, and in Salesforce, it's text area pick list, email, multi-select pick list. All of that would be just a string in Apex, so it's way simpler than in Salesforce itself. Variables are okay, but you need to be able to do something with variables. Like, for example, adding them together, right? What can you do with Apex? Or what you can do with strings? With strings, you can only put two different strings together. You cannot multiply strings, or you cannot subtract one string from another, or divide them. You can only add them together. And the fancy way for saying adding two strings together, it's called concatenating two different strings. I don't know, in coding, they always come up with funny names for absolutely trivial things. So what can you do, and how can you add two different strings together? Let's have a look at this. So we're gonna have string A would be something like hello, and string B would be world, and semicolon. And now I want to have string C would be equal to A plus B, and then I'm gonna print it out so that I can easily see what's going on there. System.debug, and I'm gonna click on execute right now. Right? Hello world, right? Maybe we can even add here white space, so it's a bit more beautiful. Well, you cannot divide it. You can't do anything else with this. Right? That's all you can do with them. Very simple. Another thing, integers. Let's go discuss integers. So let me just change all of this into the integer. So that's gonna be just 10. That's gonna be 3, and then here we already finally can multiply them, and of course that's supposed to be integer as well, right? So let's click on the execute, and 30, right? So this is 30, makes sense. 10 by 3, 30. But here's an interesting thing. What happens if I change here to dividing it, right? Everything else is simple. You obviously add just two integers together. It's gonna be just you just add them. That's all. That's why I'm jumping immediately into the edge cases, where it's a little bit strange. So pause this video and think about what's gonna happen. What will be the answer once you divide them? And I'm gonna execute right now, and let's see if you guessed it correctly. 3. And the reason why it's gonna be 3 is because of the simple rule that we have in Apex, that operations within the same type gonna result into the same type, no matter what kind of operations you have. So if you have operations between two integers, the result is always gonna be an integer. So what happens that like from the math standpoint, the right answer would be 3.333 and 3 forever. But since Apex sees that both of them are integers, it's only gonna take the integer part of this whole thing, only the integer. So it's gonna be 3. Even if you had like this, 39999, it's not gonna round them up. It's only gonna take the integer part. Okay? And now we can execute this, and we can see that that's gonna be 3 again, right? So they're gonna be not an error, there's gonna be just 3. Now, what happens if you don't define one of them? Let's click on the execute, and it's gonna be null pointer exception. And this is one of the most annoying exceptions, and this is exactly the reason why you should always initialize your variables. So you should not be doing something that I see a lot of beginners do, something like this, is because you're leaving here basically a gap or a potential for a variable for whatever reason to be null, and then result into some kind of errors when you're gonna be working with this. So don't do that. Always initialize them immediately here. But now the question is, how do you produce the right result here? Because we want to see 3.333, right? The way you can do it is using decimals. Let's change everything to the decimal, and I'm gonna execute this. And now we can see the right result. obviously we cannot store in the memory an infinite amount of 33333, so it's going to be cut out at some point. And what is this point depends if you're using a double or a decimal, right? So if you use double, you might have a longer cutoff point, right? So it's not going to be visible here because this is how it is done, how it is represented with all the debug and all of this. But basically, you can just use decimals all the time. So why do you want to use decimal? Because decimal, again, it takes less space than a double, even though you can have a better precision with double and you can store potentially more 333 there. You don't want to operate unnecessary, you don't want to take up unnecessary more space, so you should use decimals. Decimals, integer, strings, we covered everything. Now, Boolean. Boolean is an interesting data type. Boolean. Let's call it A. Let me bring everything back. So it's going to be Boolean A, and now you can only put here true or false, right? It's going to be Boolean B, false, and then it's going to be Boolean C. Now, you cannot really divide booleans between each other. You cannot multiply and you cannot add them together. That does not make sense, right? So arithmetic expressions must use numeric arguments. So what you want to have here is Boolean logic. And you know it from administration, from writing formulas, is that we have AND, we have OR, and we have NOT. And AND in Apex, that would be this, OR would be this, and NOT would be exclamation point. So here, if we want to have A and B, we would write something like this. Execute, and it's going to be false. And there are only a couple of different variations what's possible here, right? So you can have true and false. Let's take AND, right? So you can have true and false. You can have false and true. It's going to be false, right? So let's write down all possible variations. So we have here false and true would be false. We have true and false. This is what we tested. Right now it's going to be false, right? Now let's test false and false. What's going to happen? False and false. What's going to happen? Let's see. False. And the last one that we want to test will be true and true. And I can already tell you that's going to be true. Wait a second. No, false and false, we need true here, and we need true here as well. Then it's going to be correct. Okay, execute. True. Right? So, you can see this is a little bit, this is only for AND. You can copy the same thing, and you can construct the same thing for OR. With OR, it's going to be a little bit different. So it's going to be true as soon as we have one of them is true, right? So it's going to be true. And if you think about this, it makes sense. If I say, for example, that I'm wearing black hoodie, which is true, and I hate tea, which is false, then this whole expression of me, if I combine them with AND, then this whole sentence is a false because one of the component is false. But if I say I wear black hoodie or I hate tea, then one of the components is true, and because I said either of them is true, this or that, then the whole expression is true. Now, where do you look up those things? Because it kind of sounds, well, what the hell is that? So you can look up here in the variable operations on the learnerapex.com, and you can see basically this whole table written down, okay? Or you can just Google for a table. It's called truth table, Boolean expression, images, and then you can try to find there like this table for and, for example. Sometimes people say like 1 is true and 0 is false, right? So you need to a little bit search here for stuff, right? But it's called a truth table because there is only limited amount of operations that we can do here, and we only have 2 values and limited amount of operation, right? Now, one thing that we still need to discuss is what happens when we combine multiple different types together. So for example, we have a string here, and let's say hi, and it's gonna be hi, my age is, and then we have integer age is 25. Now, how do we combine it together in the full greeting? We can say hi plus age. Now, why do I need to put here a string? Why it's not an integer? Well, because we have here a part that is a string. So string full greeting, and now we can print it out system.debug, and we're gonna pull the full greeting, and we're gonna click on the execute here, and let's see what's gonna happen. Hi, my name is 25. My age is 25. That's what we see. So the way of how we can think about this is that any type plus string always gonna have a string component inside. It's the same for a formula. If you have a formula and you concatenate a text field with a number field or with a checkbox, it's not gonna stop being like the end result. It's not gonna be stop being text because you have a text component in it. So any type that you add to a string or a string you add to any type is gonna be string at the end, right? Here's another example. The same goes for integer, right? If you have operations within integer, it's always going to stay an integer, right? So I'm not going to go into this again. Boolean operations, we covered this as well. Truth table. And the only thing that we still need to cover are the 6 comparison operators. The 6 comparison operators are that you saw there. So it's greater than or equal, it's less than or equal, and then it's equal, and then not equal. But the interesting thing about this is that you need to have the same data type on both sides. You cannot have different data types there. It's something like, okay, can you compare a checkbox to a number? Not really, right? So can you say that the checkbox is greater than 12? Doesn't make sense. The same way, can you say that the name Alex is greater than 42? Also doesn't make sense, right? So here's how it looks like. We have an integer age, and we have integer allowed to drink, and that's going to be 18, right? And now we want to compare those two. So I'm going to write here, I'm going to put it blank, and I'm going to say, let's change this to my age. Let's say I am allowed to drink would be equal to if my age is greater than allowed to drink, right? So if my age is greater than the age that I defined here, then I'm allowed to drink. So what should be the type of this variable? It definitely should be a Boolean, because the answer to this is one variable greater than another. The answer is either yes or no. So it's either true or false. Now, what happens if I said my age is greater than Alex? Let's try to execute, right? So it says comparison arguments must be of compatible types, integer, string, right? So it says, okay, this integer, this is string. It doesn't make sense. You cannot compare them. So you need to pay attention that on both sides, you always have the same data type, okay? And you can do the same with strings. So you can have string A would be equal to Alex, and then you can have string B would be equal to, for example, what's Matt, and then we have string. Here's the type of string, And then we have boolean, let's call it the same, a would be equal to b, right? And then we can print it out and see what's going to be here in this variable. Are they the same? Obviously the answer is going to be no, so we should be able to see false, and we see false. Then if we say here not equal, then we should be able to see a true, if Salesforce is going to allow me, of course, with their execution speed, lightning speed. Okay, true, we see true, right? Now, this is a boolean. So this is where it gets interesting, because what you can do is that you can take those things and you can compare them between each other. So we have here a boolean, and now I'm going to create another boolean, and I'm going to say whatever, boolean c would be equal to false, and then boolean result would be equal to same or c. It doesn't make any sense, right? So there's no logic behind it, what I'm trying to show you. But what I want to show you is that you can go from strings to comparing them to another data type. So you can compare them and you can end up with a boolean, and then you can use those booleans the same way you're using the booleans any other way, right? So because it's just a boolean. So I'm going to click on the execute here, and we're going to see something cool, true. Alright, so this was everything that you need to know about variables, about the theory, but as I said to you, the theory is quite useless, because what you need to do with Apex is you need to write code, because mind-blowing thing that to write code and to learn how to write code, you need to write a lot of code. So what we're gonna be doing is that I'm gonna solve all the tasks here that I have for my cohort. This is 90-day sprint, right? So this is the first couple of days of the sprint. And for those who don't have access there, well, you can still join for the next one. You can feel free to just pause here and then just solve those tasks on your own. But here's how it goes. So here I wanted to copy them here, but then they don't really copy in the proper way. So I'm not gonna be doing that. All right. So here's the first task: create a new variable a, type integer, and the value is 15. Remember, always when we create variables, we always need to follow pretty much the same template. 1, 2, equal 3. The first one is very easy because this is the type of the variable. Integer in this case. Then the second one is the name, and here we have the name a, right? So it's going to be a, and the value is going to be 15. Not like this, right? It's going to be 15. And I'm going to copy it, and I'm going to create another variable b, and it's going to be 22. Okay. Now, in one row, instantiate a new variable sum. A word, instantiate, right? So we can declare and instantiate variables. This is just basically a fancy word of saying integer sum. Okay. Then sum of a and b. That should be the value of this variable sum. And we literally, just as we do it, we just translate it the same way. Sum a and b. Now I can execute this. And here in the logs, I'm going to be able to see sum. But we also don't want to really go through the logs so much because it just wastes a lot of time, and it's kind of hard to see here what's going on. So what we want to have is something like system.debug to check it out, right? And I'm going to click on the execute, and we should be able to see 37, right? So this is a quicker way of doing that. Now, one of the most important things is that system.debug is never a part of the functionality of the code that you're going to be writing. So if the client comes to you and asks to write some kind of functionality in Apex, you will never have to write system.debug. System.debug is only for your purpose as a developer to see stuff easily. You can see all the same stuff without system.debug. It just takes a little bit more time. And with the system.debug, you can print out the things that you're interested into, not just what is printed anyway in the console. So it's important for you that never confuse the system.debug in the tasks that we have. If I ask you to display something in a certain way, it's only for basically for the testing purpose, just for the practice, not that it's going to be in any situation part of your project. Okay. Now, This task says that we need to output variable a so that you display variable a is equal to 15, and then at the end we should be able to see something like this, right? Now let me print out here a and execute. You can see that it prints out as 15. So even though I have now my debug there, it's not really for me, I cannot really understand what kind of value it is, especially if I print out here multiple variables, right? So if I have system.debug A, then I have debug B, and then I'm gonna have also debug sum, right? So I can output as many as I want, and I click on execute. And now we have all the right values, but we cannot really see which value is which variable. We kind of have to remember this, and right now we still can see it because, well, the code is quite simple, but what if the code is super complex and the logs that you have are over a lot of different business processes, a lot of different triggers, flows, whatever. It's gonna be hard for you to understand what exactly was printed out. So usually what you wanna have here is some kind of way to tell what's going on here, and I'm gonna write here variable a is equal plus a. This is a string here, and we are adding to this string an integer. And the way you could do it would be also like this: string a, for example, a string. And then you can print out the string here. But because I don't want to use this variable anywhere, and I also don't want to have too many variables, so I'm just gonna put it here, and it's fine. And then I'm just gonna copy this. I'm gonna do here variable b is equal, and then we're gonna put b there. And then what we need to do is that we need to output sum, that it's sum of a and b would be equal to this one. All right, let's click on the execute and see if that's correct. Execute a 15, 22, and 15, which is not correct because here I forgot and we need to have sum. Now let's execute again and see that should be already correct, right? And we have 37, right? Congrats. So that's good. That's correct. Let's go to the next one, multiplication. Feel free to just pause here the video and then continue. Basically, we need to create a new variable called multiplication. It's going to be integer, and we're going to continue using these a and b variables. So multiplication, integer, multiplication would be a multiplied by b. And I'm gonna print out immediately. And usually the way I print out when I really work in the org that I wanna debug and I wanna see, I usually just do something like this. So I do something quick. I don't write the whole sentence there, just write quick way to see what kind of variable is it. Then we have integer division result, and then we divide a by b, right? So a divided by b. And I'm gonna just copy the system.debug, and I'm gonna put here integer division and integer division. So let's execute and see what it's gonna be. And it's executing, and we have 330, which is, it's 15 multiplied by 22, which is correct. Oh well, apparently it's some kind of gun. Okay. All right. Anyway, and integer division, we can see that it's 0. And why is it? Because a is 15 and then b is greater, right? So if you really divide it, it's going to be less than 0. It's going to be, apparently it's also a gun. Interesting. So it's going to be less than 0, and Apex just going to take the integer part behind it. Okay, so that's why we see 0 there. How would you be able to fix it? Well, you need to change the types. About this a little bit later after the practice, how you can change the types. Integer division, we are done with this one. This one's done. Decimals. Now we're going to create decimal 1, decimal 2, decimal 3, and we're going to do the subtraction. Nice. Let's do that. Decimal 1 would be equal to what? 314, which is approximation of a p-value. Decimal 2 would be equal to 0.14, and then that decimal 3 will be equal, we just subtract one from another. Decimal 3 would be equal, which one? So dec2 minus dec1. And now we can print it out as well. System.debug, and I'm gonna print out something like dec3 would be equal to plus dec3. All right. Now here's the thing: in developer console, you can also just highlight those things and the code that you want to execute, and then you can click on the execute highlighted, and it's gonna work. All right. -3. Yeah, well, obviously, yeah. I probably wanted to have something like this. Whatever, doesn't matter. You can subtract one from another. I think it's all good. We can consider this one done as well. Decimal division. This is an interesting task because now here we need to create division result, and it's going to be division between dec1 and dec2. And then we division multiplication. We're going to multiply what we got here in this task with the division result with a 10. Easy, easy. All right. So decimal division result. What do we divide by what? Dec1 and dec3. Okay, dec1 divided by dec3. And let's just print it out immediately. I'm just gonna copy here. Copy, and division result is equal to division result. All right, and then we need to have division multiplication. Decimal division multiplication would be equal to multiplication between division result and number 10. It's too much. Yes, now that seems to be correct. Okay, and the same, I'm gonna just print out this division and multiplication, and let's finally run this thing to see what's going on. I'm gonna even make it a little bit smaller so that you can see the whole code at the same time. So I'm gonna execute highlight here, and we should be able to see what's going on here. Yep, you can see that we have here different values, and you can see that some of them is probably rounded up because it probably doesn't end with 7. It probably goes forever with the 666, but because we don't have infinite amount of memory in computer, we have to kind of stop at some point and show a rounded up version of it. Now here it's actually rounded up. Okay, right, let's go to strings. Right here we have Alex name, and we need to put Alex inside. Then we have greeting, my name is, and then we need to concatenate, again, those two variables we need to concatenate with each other. So string, what was that? String Alex name would be equal to Alex, and then string greeting would be equal to, hi, my name is, hi, what's going on? My name is, and string full greeting would be equal to greeting plus Alex name. Exactly. So nothing new in comparison to what we've done so far. System.debug full greeting. Right, so nothing new. We have done it already. I'm just gonna execute highlighted to see how it looks like. And hi, my name is Alex, which is quite good, what we wanted. Now we're gonna create a new variable age, and then we're gonna assign 30. So Alex is 30. Integer age would be equal to 30, and then string, I think it's called my age here, would be something like this. What my age is. Okay, my age is, and then we have here full greeting and my age, and we need to print them out. I think what this variable meant to do is something like this, right? So my age is as plain text concatenated with the value of the variable age, right? So we're concatenating them, and now we can do the system.debug, and we can print out here my age. Let's do it. Execute highlighted, and we're gonna be able to see, hi, my name is Alex and my age is 30. Nice. Congrats. So if you made it so far, those were pretty easy variables, right? But this is the point where you have to start, because a lot of people, they start not with variables. They start with whatever other thing they want to start: methods, classes, objects, inheritance. Yeah, but you need to get this practice done here, and you need to make sure that you understand those things, right? And the best way to do it is just actually doing the practice. So if you don't have enough practice, you can always go to my learnapex.com and you can purchase the course, and here you're gonna have a lot of practice. So here you have 4 tasks, here you have 6 tasks, and then here you have 15 tasks, and then you have even more different tasks, right? And you have additional theory also, right? So if you don't have enough practice, go there to the learn-apex. So let me show you, learn-apex.com, and you can practice there. Anyway, let's continue then. So we have here my age, full greeting, so it's done. Now we're gonna do something that is a little bit more difficult for the people usually, right? So we're gonna go here and we're gonna start with this task is 20. So is 20, what we need is use this equal to compare the variable age with the value 20, and then save the result of the comparison to the is20 variable. So for example, if the age is 20, then this variable is20 should be true, and if not, then it should be false. Quite easy. So the way we're gonna do it is that obviously is20 should be a boolean, right? Because whenever you have something like is, it's gonna be either it is or it's not, so it's 2 cases, so it's true or false. So it's gonna be a boolean is20, and we compare age to 20. That's all. Relatively simple. System.debug is 20, right? And we can see, we can print it out, so execute highlighted. Let's see. Is20 is false, right? So the last variable is false. Okay, makes sense, because the age is 30, right? So now is Alex, the same idea. We are using this equal comparison to compare Alex's name with the value Alex. And here, this one, it should be already true, right? So let me do like this. First, let me add here so that it's a little bit more clear. Is20, and then here we're gonna have is Alex, and we're gonna put here name equal to Alex, right? Important thing, name, Alex name, not just name. Alex name is a string, and here is a string as well, right? So the same types on both sides. That's important. And we can even print it out in the same way. So we can say is Alex equal to is Alex. And let's see what's the next task here. Is Alex underage? So this is an interesting one, because here we need to use equal and AND operator to put following logic into a boolean. If age is below 18 and name is Alex, then true, everything else is false. So even if we have here an if statement, you can recognize that this is still just going to be just one boolean. We don't need to use any if statement. And in fact, like if you're doing this cohort, for example, or learn Apex, I never give you tasks where you have to use something that is from the next topics, right? So you will never use this thing here. So if you want to have age below 18 and name Alex, let's just copy it here. Boolean is Alex underage. I can just copy it here. And the first thing that I can change here is this AND, because I know that AND in Apex is this, 2 ampersands, AND. Then name is Alex. First of all, we don't have name, we have Alex name. Is Alex, it's this equal sign checkbox, and Alex, we use single quotes for string, okay? And age is below. Is below, it means it's less than, okay? That's pretty much all we need here. And I can just print it out. I'm gonna again copy here, and I'm gonna say is Alex underage, and I'm gonna print it out. And let's see if that's gonna be true or false. What do you think? You can probably guess already. All right. And it's going to be false, of course, because Alex is 30, so he's not underaged. Okay. So this is relatively simple. And now if we want to make basically the opposite variable behind it, we can do Boolean. Sorry, one thing that I need to explain about this is actually, before we go further, is that here, this one, we already had it here, this condition. So what we can do is that we can just put it here, is Alex, like this, right? The same you could do here with the age. You could take it out into separate variable, like for example, is 20, whatever. Like we can combine. The most important is that, again, even though you're operating here with the age, this whole thing here, it's a Boolean. That's why you can have this operation AND, because you can have this operation only between one Boolean and another Boolean. So you need to pay attention to this one. I'm gonna leave it like this, because now we need to create another variable, is not Alex underage. Strange name, is not Alex underage, but we are here not in English lesson, so excuse me for my bad English. Right. So this is an easy one, because you want to just negate. So you want to say something like, not. This is what you would do in the formula, right? But exactly, you can do the same with just this sign. What's the sign? Exclamation point, with exclamation point. Right, so we can remove this thing, we don't need it, and then we can print this thing out, is not Alex underage plus. Right, so we have this one, and we need to create a new variable, is teenager, and it's going to be true if the age variable is bigger, greater than 10 and less than 20, and false. Otherwise, also the same simple thing. It's going to be Boolean, is teenager, and age is greater than 10, and age is less than 19, I guess. Right, system.debug is teenager. Right. Let's now execute every single thing we have there. Execute. All right, you can see here false, true, false, false. I mean, obviously, is teenager is false because the age is 30. But if we change, let's say we change it to 15, and then Alex is going to be 15, so it means that it's true, and and here we can see underage. Now, I want to show you a couple of very important mistakes and very, very frequent mistakes that people do. Let's say we have here a Boolean. Boolean A is equal to true, and then Boolean B would be equal to false. And then Boolean C would be equal to A and B. That makes sense. Like, most people are gonna say, okay, yeah, that's quite obvious what you do here. You have A, B, and then you combine them. But as soon as we give those Booleans different names, it kind of starts getting weird, and people start making mistakes. So for example, I have an integer, age would be equal to 60, and then I have a Boolean, is senior, and it's going to be age above 65, let's say, right? Then I have here integer, and let's say income, and it's going to be whatever this number is. Let's make something more realistic. Let's do like this. What's that? Is that millions? Just 1.5 million? I hope it's realistic. I mean, we all have dreams, right? So let's go to the Boolean. Now is wealthy, and let's say the income is going to be more than whatever, 500,000. Then we can consider being wealthy. Depends, of course, where you live. In San Francisco, probably not, but in general, I would say if with 500,000 you're quite good off. Now, wealthy senior. Now, I want this variable to be true when it is a senior, and is wealthy, right? So basically what we need to say is that when this variable is true and this variable is true, then this variable should be true as well. So what some people start doing is that they do something like this: true and is wealthy equal to true. And then system.debug, and let's do like this. Right. Which makes sense, right? You want to say, okay, my third variable is going to be true when this variable is true and this variable is true as well, right? So let's execute this, and we're going to see that this is false. Why is it false? Because it's not a senior. Because it's not a senior here, right? So it makes sense. I was confused. So let's say it's 70, so that we set it true. Okay, and it's good because we checked both cases, right? So you saw it was false, now you saw it's true. So basically it works. But this unnecessary part is this one. Whenever you have booleans, you really don't need to compare them. So if you have here is senior, you can just leave them like this, wealthy. Because what's going to happen is that, let's have a look what happens when we leave it, right? If this variable is true, then you're going to compare true is equal to true, which always going to be true, right? So let's just write it down, because when it's going to be visually, you're going to see it, right? Another case that is possible is that this variable is going to be false, right? Because remember, the second variable is like basically fixed, right? Only this variable then can have different values, right? Is senior true? When this thing is false, then everything is going to be false. When this thing is true, then everything then everything is going to be true. So you can see that this value here and this value here, they correlate completely to 100% all the time. So you don't need to have this check. You can just immediately leave this variable here and this variable here, and it's going to be exactly the same result. Okay, so you don't need those things. You don't need those things. You don't need this. You're good to go like this. All right, so this is good. It's more obvious if you do it with the A and B, but it's less obvious when we speak about something that makes sense for our brain. Another important thing that I'm not going to go very deep into, but it's important to just show you that it exists. So let's say you have a decimal here, and I'm going to say it's income, and it's going to be something like this. Yeah. Let's do something like this. Let's say you're earning 12,000, and then you have something like this. Yeah, so you earn 12,000.0. So this is a decimal, and now you have a string. I earn, and here I make plus income, and I'm gonna print this out. System.debug, I earn. Yeah, let's see what we have there. Execute highlighted, and I make blah 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 0.0. Now this is quite ugly because it's basically an integer, right? It doesn't have any decimal points, but it is displayed with a 0.0, and you want to avoid those things. There are many ways you can format this number. There are methods that you can use, which we will discuss later, so you don't need to know what are the methods right now, so we don't need to use them. But there's another thing which is called typecasting, and this is basically a way for you to change the type of a variable on the fly during the execution. It is a little bit dangerous sometimes, and usually you wouldn't use it that many times with integers and decimals, but you need to just be aware of this point of this thing, and you're gonna understand what it is way later once we discuss classes and objects and object-oriented programming in more depth than that. So right now you don't really need to understand very deep. But what this is essentially an integer. So what I can do here is that I can open parentheses and I can say that this is going to be an integer. And I'm going to put here an integer. And now if I execute this highlighted, it's going to be printed out properly. Of course, if you have here something like 0.5, right, something like this, and you cast it into an integer, it's gonna lose the decimal part of the calculation. So this is kind of the danger behind it. So use it only if you're 100% sure that you actually do have an integer here, and if you want to format it in a certain way, right? But this is called typecasting, and you need to be aware of this thing because it's going to be very important a little bit later through your career. So this is literally everything you need to know about variables. There's a lot of different things that we still did not really discuss, right? Classes, methods, and all of this. How do you use it? Primitive data types, not primitive data types, all of this blah blah. But I can tell you from 2 years of teaching and from developing the courses and all of this, you don't need it right now. Right now you need to focus on understanding the principles, getting familiar with how to execute Apex code, how to run Apex code, what works, what doesn't work. And then on top of that, we're gonna build on classes and methods and objects and as objects. And then later down the road, you're gonna understand the difference between primitive, non-primitive data types. You're gonna understand everything. But we need to limit right now what you learn in order to focus on the most important stuff, because the most important thing when you learn coding is to get relatively quick to being able to apply the stuff, because you don't want to spend 5 months learning all possible things and you're gonna only be using like 30% of the stuff that you learned. And trust me, in Apex you can learn stuff forever and never be done with the stuff that you still need to learn. I am still learning a lot of different things after many years as a Salesforce developer, and that's going to be all the time because Salesforce also produces new different new updates. You're always going to have to learn something new. So don't focus on what is there out to learn, incredible, a lot of different things. No, focus on boiling down those things, understanding them, really practicing them. This is the most important. You need to write code. You need to write as much code as possible. And once you feel like you can create those variables easily, once you feel like, okay, if I tell you create an integer or string variable or a Boolean variable, and you can kind of compare them together, you can add them together, you can multiply them, then you can move on to the next topic, which will be the next video, the next week for the people in the cohort, or the next section in the Learn Apex platform. So thank you everyone. Please, I have only one ask. If you like the video, please actually smash on the like and write a comment that you liked it. Comments is how I see if people like it or not. So please write a comment if that was helpful. I would really appreciate it. And thank you and see you in the next one.